Hi, this is Sally and this is the independent study video for the planetary boundaries topic. Planetary boundaries were first defined in 2009. This is a multidisciplinary issue with many international, economic, social, political, technical and of course environmental issues to consider. Everyone has to play a part. The resources on Earth are being squeezed by the demand being placed on them. Planetary boundaries bridge the gap between economic and social issues with a view to creating a safe and just space for all of humanity to operate within the means of the planet's limited resources. You need to learn a clear and concise definition for planetary boundaries, a threshold value for a process that is affected by human activity. Crossing these boundaries could generate abrupt or irreversible environmental changes. There are two core boundaries, climate change and biosphere integrity. We have already crossed these planetary boundaries, meaning that we are driving the Earth into a new and unpredictable state with severe consequences for the biosphere. There are 9 planetary boundaries to learn, as you can see here. Bob's calf is an example of a mnemonic you could use to help you remember these, or you may want to come up with your own one. When a boundary is crossed, it means that there is no longer a linear relationship with the effects of a process, and small changes can have large and devastating effects. The limits for values for each process have been estimated to see which boundaries have been crossed, which are avoidable, and the impacts this may have. Scientific research indicates that since the Industrial Revolution, an increasing amount of pressure has been placed on the Earth's resources due to human activity becoming the main driver of global environmental change. We can see here that ozone depletion, ocean acidification and freshwater use boundaries have not yet been crossed and remain in the safe operating space. But the climate change, biodiversity integrity, land system change and biogeochemical flows boundaries have been crossed and are in an area of increasing risk. The atmospheric, aerosol and novel entities boundaries are as yet unquantified due to the many variables involved. This is summarised here. Now let's look at each boundary. The climate change boundary. As we have crossed this core boundary, even if we completely stop releasing greenhouse gas emissions, primarily from the burning of fossil fuels, average global temperatures and sea levels would still continue to rise for many years, decades or longer to come. There is a lot of political pressure, including setting international targets for the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, such as the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, but it is argued that more could be done to develop alternatives such as biofuels, a fuel made by a biological process such as anaerobic digestion rather than by geological processes such as long-term heat and compression that forms fossil fuels. These include bioethanol, biodiesel and biogas. Using biofuels can reduce carbon emissions, as when these plants are grown they take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere when they photosynthesize, but they also take up land space that would otherwise be used to grow crops for food, and they are often grown in monoculture, requiring large volumes of water for irrigation, and when combusted they actually produce more of the greenhouse gas nitrous oxide than fossil fuels do. Here are some examples of causes, effects and solutions, but as for the other boundaries as well that we will look at, the biosphere integrity boundary. We depend on the interactions between species in an ecosystem to recycle nutrients and carbon dioxide, but human intervention has led to environmental change occurring too quickly for natural selection to occur to enable species to become better adapted to their changing habitats, meaning that some species are not reproducing quickly enough to be maintained, and therefore this leads to species extinction and reduces biodiversity. Solutions may include monitoring biodiversity levels, raising public awareness and using sperm or the land system change boundary. This boundary represents the misuse of land resulting in too little food being produced. There's a growing population and demand for food which is in direct conflict with using land to grow biofuels. Clearing land can result in deforestation leading to soil erosion and biodiversity loss. Farming could be made more efficient. There could be a global crackdown on meat consumption and the development of genetically modified crops. The geochemical flows boundary. The limits have already been crossed for the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, meaning that they are no longer self-sustaining. This is primarily due to the overuse of fertilisers leading to pollution and eutrophication. The stratospheric ozone boundary. Chlorofluorocarbons and related compounds are formed in aerosols, solvents, refrigerator coolants and in the manufacture of disposable food and drink containers. They lead to a breakdown of ozone by altering the position of equilibrium in the equation shown here. The thinning of the ozone layer was particularly significant over Antarctica as observed in the 1970s. As ozone absorbs UV radiation, the degradation led to more UV light reaching the surface of the planet and a greater risk of skin cancer and cataracts, as this can cause DNA mutations. The manufacture of CFCs was banned in the 80s as part of the Montreal Protocol's agreement, with reductions placed on their use, allowing ozone layer to continue to rebuild. This means that this is the only boundary that has been proactively avoided, but it is feared that this problem may reappear in the future. The ocean acidification boundary. Combustion of fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide, which dissolves in the oceans, forming hydrogen carbonate. This releases hydrogen ions, increasing acidity and lowering pH. This is on a logarithmic scale, i.e. a small drop in pH corresponds to a huge increase in hydrogen ion concentration. This acidic pH softens the shells of crustaceans and coral, making them more vulnerable to chemical and physical attack. It can also damage fish gills, for example. The freshwater use boundary. Most plants and animals rely on fresh water to survive. Below the freshwater boundary, organisms do not have enough water to survive. Often, fresh water is locked up in ice sheets or contaminated with pollutants or dust or salinated. It's also unevenly distributed across the planet, and there is less available due to an increasing population, high use in agriculture, climate change, and pollution, and this can all lead to a water shortage. Water needs to be conserved, and some can be desalinated, such as by pumping it through a partially permeable membrane and reverse osmosis. However, this does have a high energy consumption. Aerosol loading boundary. Particulates from combustion and dust from industrial processes build up in the atmosphere. This can exacerbate respiratory problems, reduce crop yield, and increase global warming. The novel entities boundary. Due to the use of new technologies and materials, there has been an increase in air pollution, but no limits have yet been calculated, and as new technologies are constantly being developed, it's hard to predict long-term effects. Some organic pollutants have already been banned, such as DDT, a pesticide that was widely used in America a few decades ago, and PCBs, which have many uses in chemical industrial applications. Both of these are found to be persistent in the environment, building up in the food chain, causing adverse health effects to wildlife. This map illustrates some potentially catastrophic tipping global points. Thank you for listening.